Hello, aspirants. How are you holding up? This examination is one of the most demanding things you will ever take on, and the quiet pressure of it can sit on your chest in a way nothing else does. Because the result of these few months can quite literally change the entire shape of your life. So let us begin where the marks live, in current affairs synced to the right concept. Today on the sociology desk, we are doing two events. The first is the artificial intelligence shock to India's information technology workforce and what it tells us about the middle class. The second is the 20th anniversary of the Forest Rights Act and the still unresolved question of whether the Adivasi belongs to the assimilation project or to an autonomy project. The whole point of the next 10 minutes is one thing. The top ranker is not the one who reads more news. The top ranker is the one who hears a news item and instantly knows the thinker, the concept, and the answer move. That is what we are going to do twice. Event 1. The IT story is not really a hiring story. It is a labor process story. And that is the language an examiner wants to see. Bernstein, in an open letter to the Prime Minister, has warned that artificial intelligence is now coming for the high-wage knowledge work that built the Indian aspirational middle class for 2 decades. Tata Consultancy Services has shed about 12,000 employees, and net hiring across the top 5 Indian IT firms has dropped from an average of 230,000 to roughly 170,000 in the last financial year. This sits in Paper 1, Unit 6, Works and Economic Life, Subunit C, Labor and Society. Hold that location in your head while we move to the concept. Now, what exactly is happening here structurally? The IT engineer in India was doing what we may call routine cognitive labor. Standard analyst work, standard coding tasks, standard back office processing. The thing about that kind of work is that it can be codified, that is, written down as steps. And anything that can be codified, generative AI can absorb. So the platform takes over the routine, the judgment migrates upward to a small number of architects who own the algorithm, and a very large surplus of credentialed graduates is left without a chair when the music stops. That surplus, sitting in the labor market, has a second effect. It disciplines the wages of those still employed, because employers know that for every engineer they have, there are 5 waiting outside the gate at a lower price. And here, aspirants, the precise thinker, with the precise concept, is Frederick Winslow Taylor. Taylor's idea, in his work, The Principles of Scientific Management, was that the modern factory works by separating conception from execution. The artisan who could think and do becomes the worker who only does, while a management above him does all the thinking. That is the foundational move of industrial capitalism. What we are watching today is exactly the same move, but in cognitive labor. The junior analyst, the junior coder, was doing both conception and execution in small quantities. Generative AI takes the conception layer and absorbs it into the platform. So when you write this for 20 marks, the line is this: what Taylor mechanized on the factory floor, generative AI now performs on the cubicle. That is the kind of sentence that earns the 18 mark. Lock in the second thinker on this story, because in a 20 marker, you must have at least 2. Karl Marx, with the specific concept of the Reserve Army of Labor in Capital Volume 1. Marx's argument was that capitalism constantly creates a surplus population, an unemployed reserve, whose very existence cheapens the labor of those still working. The stranded software graduate in India today is the Reserve Army in its credentialed form. He is not a slum dweller. He speaks English. He has an engineering degree. And yet, structurally, he is performing the exact function Marx described. That is, theoretical precision. Name the thinker, name the concept, name the work, and then bring the event in just 2 sentences as evidence. Now switch sides with me. Sit on the examiner's chair for 1 minute. You have 2 answer scripts in front of you. Script A opens with, "In today's world, artificial intelligence is changing everything." Then explains the Bernstein letter, narrates the TCS layoffs, and concludes that the government must reskill people. That script gets you about 14 on 20. Why? Because it is journalism, not sociology. There is no thinker, no concept, no labor process tradition. Script B opens with one structural claim. Industrial capitalism reorganized the artisan into a wage earner. Informational capitalism is now reorganizing the wage earner into a prompt. Then it names Taylor with scientific management, names Marx with the Reserve Army of Labor, uses the layoff figure and the Bernstein letter in 2 sentences only as evidence, brings in Bourdieu's habitus on the side, and closes with a forward-looking line on who owns the algorithm in informational capitalism. That script gets you 18, maybe 19. The refrain is this: the current event is your evidence, the theory is your destination. Repeat that in your head every time you open an answer. Event 2. On the 28th of June, the Campaign for Survival and Dignity held a public meeting in Bhubaneswar, marking 20 years of the Forest Rights Act of 2006. The numbers they put on the table are the most important sociological evidence you can carry into the examination hall. 5.1 million claims have been filed under this act. Of those, 1.8 million stand rejected outright. Only 121,705 community titles have been granted in the entire country. That is the empirical signature of the policy. This sits in Paper 2, B3, Tribal Communities in India, Subunit D, Issues of Integration and Autonomy, and C, Colonial Policies and Tribes. 2 subunits, 1 event. That is a 20 marker waiting to be written. And here is the concept you must hold tight. Indian tribal policy has never been merely administrative. It has carried within it a fundamental disagreement about whether Adivasi society should be absorbed into the national mainstream or whether it should be protected as a distinct social formation with internal autonomy. The Forest Rights Act actually houses both positions in one statute. The individual entitlement under the Act is the assimilation move. The community forest right, vested in the Gram Sabha, is the autonomy move. 20 years on, the implementation record tells you which logic the Indian state has actually chosen. Thinker 1, and this is your Indian thinker, G.S. Ghurye, with the very specific phrase, "tribes as backward Hindus," in his work, The Scheduled Tribes. Ghurye's position was that Adivasi communities are not a separate civilization. They sit on a continuum with caste Hindu society, and the proper policy direction is integration, citizenship, mainstreaming. The individual entitlement framework of the Forest Rights Act follows exactly this logic. It treats the Adivasi as a deficit citizen who must be brought in. That is the Ghurye moment of the statute. Thinker 2, the foil to Ghurye, is Verrier Elwin with his work, A Philosophy for NIFA. Elwin's position was almost the opposite. He argued that protecting the internal autonomy of the tribal world is a precondition for any humane relationship between it and the modern Indian state. Premature absorption without autonomy is just dispossession in a friendlier vocabulary. The community forest right under Section 3 of the Forest Rights Act is the Elvinian moment of the statute. And there is a beautiful empirical example to drop into the answer here. The Gond village of Pachgaon in Chandrapur, Maharashtra, holds about 1,006 hectares of community forest and runs a bamboo enterprise worth 3.4 crore rupees. That is what the Elvinian logic looks like when it is allowed to work. Examiner chair, one more time. Script A opens with the Forest Rights Act of 2006 was passed to give rights to tribal communities. Then narrates the sections of the act. Then says, implementation is poor. Governments should do better. That is descriptive, around 14 on 20. Script B opens with a single structural claim. Indian tribal policy has carried within it a foundational disagreement between Gurye and Elwin, and the Forest Rights Act houses both positions in one statute. Then it names Gurye with tribes as backward Hindus, names Elwin with the autonomy position and a philosophy for Nifa, brings in Virginia Shasha on the state-tribe relationship for the third move, uses the figures 5.1 million, 1.8 million, Pachgaon in 2 sentences only, and closes with Hasdeo Arand and the Sijimali bauxite contestations as the unresolved frontier. That is your 18 on 20. Once again, the current event is your evidence. The theory is your destination. And here is a probable mains 2026 question for paper 2 on this event. Compare and contrast the positions of G.S. Ghurye and Verrier Elwin on Indian tribal society. In the light of 2 decades of the Forest Rights Act, which framework better explains the contemporary Adivasi predicament? Comparative question, 20 marks. Both positions must be done with equal rigor, and the synthesis is what decides the score. Quick revision before we close. On the first event, the IT layoffs are a labor process story, not a hiring story. Taylor's scientific management, Marx's reserve army of labor, Bourdieu's habitus, in that order. The event in 2 sentences as evidence. On the second event, the Forest Rights Act is the meeting point of Ghurye's assimilation and Elwin's autonomy. 20 years on, the implementation record tilts toward the Ghurye pole. The Bhubaneswar 28 June meeting, the 5.1 million claims, the Pachgaon bamboo enterprise, are your 3 pieces of empirical evidence. Carry these into your next answer writing session today. We are at the close, aspirants. This preparation is long. It drains you in ways nobody around you fully sees. The real secret of cracking this examination is not intelligence. It is the quiet, unromantic act of showing up at your desk one more day when every part of you wants to stop. The candidate who simply does not break that habit in the end is the one whose name appears on the list. Keep walking. If today's analysis was useful to you and you would like the full model answer, the answer skeleton, the quotation arsenal, the flashcards, and the examiner notes for every single event, simply drop your email in the comments below or write to the team at team@upscdesk.com and we will share the subscription details with you. We will see you tomorrow.